Alright, we're back in this scene, and now we're going to be talking about color correcting your lighting passes. Um, to illustrate that, let's just go ahead and render this. And we'll just pretend this is one of our lighting passes. This is some characters, our environment, whatever. Let's save this out, and we'll call this white light. And I'll save it as a PNG. And then let's change the color of this light. And let's just say maybe that's the color that we like. So I'll render that. And I'm going to save that out. And I'll call this color light PNG. Alright. Let's go back into Fusion now, and we'll load those in. Alright. So we've got our white light and our colored light. Now, normally, your workflow is probably to do something like this, where you're in Max, you set up maybe several lights, maybe this is your key light, you'd have a rim light, ambient, and you'd render each of those as separate passes, and one of them, your key for instance, might look like this. And that's all well and good, but what if this color, once you had all your stuff, all your passes composited together, wasn't really the color you wanted? Well, your first instinct might be to go ahead and just take a color corrector and then change it. You can tweak it to whatever you want it to be. And there's nothing wrong with doing it this way, but mathematically there is something wrong with doing it this way. It may give you the results you want, which is fine, but I'd like to just point out another way of doing this that isn't destructive to your scene. Turns out that this color corrector is actually destroying the realism of this lighting, because the way in which this works is not accurate to how real light behaves. So instead, if you were to render your lights as white, that gives you more options in the comp. First of all, let me demonstrate why the color correct node isn't really great. Or, well, it is great. I don't want to say it's not great, but for tinting your lighting passes, it's maybe not the best thing. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a background, and I'm just going to make a gradient. And let's make this smaller, and let's take a look at that. Alright, so we just have a gradient going from black to white. And what I'm going to do with this color correct is I'm just going to make the strength 1. So we've tinted this straight over to the red at full strength. And here's the result that we get. Now it seems kind of right. The areas that are really bright are still kind of blown out, and then it falls off into red, and then you kind of get this weirdness happening over here. Not quite in the middle, but a little bit to the left of the middle, you see this sort of strange line appearing, and then from there it falls off into black. So it kind of looks like real light, but what is this actually doing when you move the color wheel around here? What's actually happening? Well, let's try and create the same exact look using color curves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the screen here so we can look at them both at the same time. And what we'll do is we'll just switch to the red channels for both of these images, and we'll make adjustments until each channel matches. So to start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a point right here in the middle. This is our 50% gray value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just push this up until I get something that matches, or at least is close enough maybe something like that. Alright, so we'll go to the green channel now. We'll do the same thing, point right in the middle, and we'll bring it down until it matches, maybe something like that. And then we'll go to the blue and do the same thing. And roughly something like that. You notice the blue and the green are in the exact same point because we were just pushing the reds. Now, just look at this curve. Obviously, this is not how light behaves. Light does not go from linear to the midpoint and then spike in a different direction, or even go up above the brightest point and then come back down. So this is kind of destroying the realism of that light. It's no longer behaving correctly. So what I recommend doing is, instead of using the color correct wheel to tint your lights, you can just use a color gain tool. Use color gain. You could also do adjustments to the gain of each channel using color correct node. It would be switching to red and then changing the gain, switching to green, changing the gain. But the color gain tool is really nice because it just has the gain for red, green, and blue right here together. So what you can do is now tint this and get a similar color. If you wanted the exact color that you had in 3D Studio, you could do that too. But all you'd have to do is, let's say you really liked this color, you just need to figure out what the 0 to 1 equivalent is of this value. And it's really easy to do that. Just open up the calculator here. It's just 212 divided by 255, so it's 0.83. So if you did that for each of these channels, and I'll pause and I'll just do that real quick. Okay, I've just figured out what each of those values are, and I've put them into Fusion, into this color gain node. So I just input those values into here, and if we look, here's the image with the color gain, and then here is the image out of max. They're identical. So the benefit of doing that is that if you ever wanted to change your lighting, something extreme, you could do it. You're not stuck with already having this color tint in there and trying to force it to be something else. You can, if you render white lights, then you have the ability to change them to any color you want, and it'll match the output you would have gotten from Max exactly. So I highly recommend working this way. It's a little bit different than you might be used to. It forces you to do a lot of your lighting and coloring in the comp, but I much prefer doing it that way, and I recommend it just because it's a lot faster and you don't have to worry so much about getting everything exactly right in Max. The other great thing about this is it's not degrading the image or changing the properties of the lights like this is. So the color gain tool rocks. One other thing that we should take a look at is what happens when you're working in floating point. So what I'll do is, I've already done this, I've updated this loader so that it's now working in float 16. And we'll put a brightness contrast on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just blow this out. So now we've got values that are way above white. And what you'll see is if we put the color gain on there and we have the color tint, everything looks pretty good. It's got the same tint, and over here it's real bright, but you can still see that the color is being put on there. And we'll do the same thing with a color correct node. and we're not going to be able to get this to match, but we'll just tint it sort of in the same direction. So you can see it's got the light tint on there, but what's important is what happens if you were to then darken the shot back down. So I'll connect these up, and I'll bring the gain back down on this shot, and doing it this way, it brings us right back to where we were. If we take a look at, well, if we turn this guy off versus this, I mean they're pretty much the same. I could put in the exact same values, but it brings us right back to where we were. With the color correct, if we bring that down, the colors are getting real messed up here. Way back here it still has the right tint, but in the areas that go past white, it's actually kind of flipping your colors around. And now the reason that that's happening is because remember when we looked at the curves here, each channel, each RGB channel here is also getting a sort of similar curve. And what's happening when you go past one is that these angles are crossing each other. This guy is starting to come back down, this one's going up, and so your colors are kind of like inverting and flipping for anything that's over 1. And that's exactly what's happening here. Your colors are kind of inverting. So when using floating point, you want to just avoid using this color corrector. And finally, the last thing that I want to point out is what this color gain is actually doing. So let me just pull these off of there, get rid of this stuff. What's actually happening when you dial these down? This is basically not doing anything different than just multiplying a solid color over your shot. And I'll illustrate that by bringing these same values into a background. So I'm just going to copy and paste these. Okay, and we'll change this to the size of our shot. Bring a merge in, connect these up, and change this to multiply. And as you can see, that and that are the exact same thing. And this is basically what's happening in Max as well. When you tint the color of your light, all it's really doing is just multiplying the color that you chose onto a white light, and then that's the result you get. So if you just think of it that way, that this is just multiplying or changing the multipliers of your red, green, and blue channel, then that's how it's working, and that's how Max lights are working.